The world is full of the unexplainable, but there are certain areas where the unexplainable seems to happen a little more frequently. Angry mothers-in-law come back as menacing creatures, screeches in the middle of the night warn of dangerous forces, and a mere nursery rhyme can cause a person to disappear from your life forever. One of these places is the strange and unusual Ozark Mountains, just west of the Appalachian Peaks. We speak with Brandon Weston, folklorist and practitioner, and get an insider's view of the magic that runs through these hills. Today on Homespun Haints. Hello, Hainted Loves. Welcome to Homespun Haints. I'm Becky.
Hey, I'm Diana.
Today on the show, we are bringing on Brandon Weston, who has just put out his third book, Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms, Magic and Folklore from the Ozark Mountains.
Hey, the Ozarks.
Yes, Hainted Loves. We are going to move a little. It's still part of the Appalachian cultural region, but it's the Ozarks. You are going to absolutely love this because Brandon is a font of knowledge. He knows so much about the traditions and the folklore from this area, and then the stories that he has, the experiences that he has. I swear will put shivers down your spine. And that's saying something because, you know, Diana, we've heard a lot.
We have. Mm-hmm. Yes. But this is going to be new stuff, I have a feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Because it spans the gap, that one big gap between your hometown and my hometown. That big gap of Arkansas, I guess.
And all the very, very interesting multi-dimensional things in between. I was really intrigued to learn how many similarities there were between Ozark culture and the East Tennessee mountain culture that I grew up with. So
that's surprising to me.
Before we bring on Brandon, I mentioned last week that I was going to go back into my hometown. Mm-hmm. And I did. And I did have some interesting experiences when I was at the hotel there, which I will be sharing on Patreon and on our YouTube channel. But I had several really interesting experiences going back to my hometown, and I thought I would share.
Yes, because I haven't heard much about this. You've been alarmingly tacit this last weekend.
Diana, you know, for my discussions with you about a lot of the dreams I have, that I have a recurring dream. Mm-hmm. A recurring dream about a house. It's generally a dilapidated structure, and I have a weird sense that I've been there before. I'm in the house. I'm usually returning. It's like in the dream I'm returning there, and I need to do something there. I can't ever figure out what it is. Like I have to move back in, or I have to stay there, or something. But there's always a room in this house that is just full of foreboding. And I don't want to go in there. And I've had people tell me over and over again, well, if you have a house in your dream, that house represents your brain. And if there's a room that is new that you've never seen before, that means that you're about to expand your subconscious somehow.
Your POV or your mindset or something, yeah.
Well, I've been having this dream for 10 years. Yeah. And I have not expanded my subconscious at all as a result.
It's always, you won't go in there.
Well, because it's terrifying.
I know.
No, but it's like terrifying in a like, trust your gut, don't go in there kind of way. Well, I got a lot of clarity on this trip up there.
Oh?
From this dream.
So you had the house dream?
I've had the house dream.
Oh, but you weren't specifically having it this
Well,
weekend.
not while I was driving, thank God. It's a 5-hour drive.
Good job.
So I drove to my hometown, and I have not been there since 2004. It's 2024. I've not been there in 20 years. Last time I was there, I was 25 years old. And then the time before that I had been there was in 1996.
I had no idea you spent that much time without visiting.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you probably don't really know anybody there anymore, huh?
No. The people that I saw at the funeral, there were a couple people that I was happy to reconnect with that lived near there, but most of them also had left. I got off the highway and I'm driving along the road. And of course, there was a part of me that was like, oh man, these roads are windy. I'm not going to know how to get there. Everything's going to look strange. It's all going to change. It was weird because everything was so familiar. Even the weeds sticking out from the side of the road, even the roots coming up, just the way the landscape eroded. I mean, all those tiny little details that you pick up in your subconscious from driving along a road, same way, there and back again, multiple times a day for 17 years, which is what I did when I was a kid. Now, I usually wasn't the driver.
That gave you even more time to look out the window and see all the little weeds at the side of the road.
And guess what else I saw on the side of the road?
A knot deer?
No.
Damn it.
The houses from my dreams.
Wait, what? Multiple houses?
Yep. They were still there. They were in even worse condition than when I had driven by. Now, this is like low-income housing, a lot of them. But people were still living there. One of them had the roof caved in and somebody was still in it. I mean, like I said, like nothing had changed. There were a few places where I think there would have been a house and it had been scraped clean, but like debris was still left there. A few of them had burned. But there were enough of them that I was like, oh, Diana, it was so weird. It was so weird.
Strange.
Yeah.
And you didn't expect this to be the house that you were dreaming about. You didn't expect to actually see them.
I had completely forgotten about what all this looked like, what everything looked like. That's why I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to recognize anything? Am I going to know where I am? And I got off the road and it was like a photograph that I had forgotten was in my brain. Everything just looked a little older, but then it was specifically this one 4-unit apartment building on the side of the mountain that had a road that went down on the side. And I remember as a kid being like, oh, that looks scary, that road. I remember always thinking, oh, I wonder who lives there. Oh my God. It was unreal. It was like when a dream comes true or something and that like feeling like, ugh.
So do you think that your dream was prophetic, having to do with these people living there or this house specifically?
I think my brain was using that as a metaphor.
Okay.
It was something that I had seen my whole young life driving past, never went in, never associated with the people living there. As many people as I knew in this small town, I never knew anybody who actually lived there.
So you wouldn't have been inside the houses to your knowledge, though.
Right. I think it was metaphor. I think it was my brain trying to tell me I had some unfinished business.
Okay.
There was a part of the town that was, or a part of my past that was undiscovered, that I didn't explore fully. And as afraid as I was of going there and looking into it, I needed to. I gotta tell you, it was interesting being there because I forgot how beautiful it was. I forgot how much I loved it. And I was really happy to be there. And then one thing about this town that happened when I did leave is I had all sorts of people try to get in touch with me because they thought I was going to be their ticket out of this town too. One story in particular where somebody ended up following me all the way up to Chicago and I made them sleep under a bridge because there was a jail cell and it was a mess.
I think you told that story on Patreon.
Okay, good. There's always been this sort of history of people seeing that I left, and there was enough instances of people being like, oh, where do you live now? Oh, do you know of any work where you're at? Oh, maybe I could come stay with you for a few months.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I was always very careful to give out my address and stuff when I was up in Illinois. However, I think I was not prepared for how much this town latched back onto me when I went through it, how much those memories came up and surfaced and bubbled up and said, hey, you've still got something here. Because I saw my acupuncturist today.
Oh.
You know where I'm going with this.
How many demons were attached to the back of your neck?
Just one this time.
Oh, just the one. That's
no,
good.
it was well. Okay, so strangely enough, let me backtrack a little bit. So of course, while I'm there, I have to stay in a haunted hotel. I went down to a little town called Rogersville, and I stayed in this lovely 200-year-old. Literally, it was built in 1824, and it was amazing. Like I said, I have videos that I will share. And I stayed in this room. I asked for the haunted room. They didn't have it. I stayed in another room. But while I really had a hard time sleeping, and I'm going to share this somewhere else, like just what all happened while I was trying to sleep there. But I did sense something small. My brain kept telling me it was a small cat, but it was something to the right of me, which was weird because the wall was to the right of me in the bed. And it was an old bed too, like an old rope bed from the 1800s. And like all
rope bed.
Instead of a box spring, it was like all these ropes tied together at the bottom.
No, I've never heard of that.
The furniture was original in this place too. You know, when you go tour one of those old fancy mansions and they've got everything roped off and like, you can see how these people lived for $5. And no, this is like you're basically staying there.
Wow.
That's the furniture that you're sleeping in. And the desk in the room, the drawer kept opening on its own because the floor was so cattywampus that the drawer wouldn't even stay shut.
That's what it was. Just gravity, sure.
So I had to shove a chair up against the drawer to keep it from opening. Anyway, while I was sleeping there, I kept imagining there was something to the right of me that kept making noise. And of course, I kept thinking, oh, it's a cat. It's a cat. Of course, there's no cat there.
It's inside the walls.
Yeah, or it was in the bed with me or something. Like, it felt like it might have been in the wall, but logically, I'm like, nothing can be there. And when I went downstairs and told them about it the next day, because they asked me to tell them if I had any experiences. And they were like, oh, that doesn't sound right. There's never really been anything like that in that room. I didn't tell them about the other stuff, which I'll share on Patreon. So I thought nothing of it, drove home, went about my week, was alarmingly tacit. And then this morning I went and saw my lovely acupuncturist who always removes entities that like to latch onto me. And I didn't say anything to her, didn't tell her where I went, nothing at all. But she's like, there's something on your right shoulder. And the way she described it, she's like, it's about the size of a cantaloupe.
So a small cat.
So a small cat. She's like, it's not malicious, but it's a hitchhiker. And I was like, God damn it. I tell you, maybe this is why I haven't come back to this town, because something's always got to follow me home. They're like, hey, let's come home with her. I don't know.
Whether it's hillbillies or ghost cats.
Yeah.
It's going to hitch a ride with you.
I don't think it was a cat. I think it had a very animalistic feel to it.
Gotcha.
Whatever it was. Like playful, but like, oh, hey, you look nice.
Well, if it was in the wall, maybe it's a pine marten.
Ghost pine marten?
You never know.
We don't have pine martens in Tennessee.
They're about the size of a cantaloupe.
We have whistle pigs.
A slice of cantaloupe, maybe.
How big do your cantaloupes get?
Pine martens aren't that big.
So anyway, she sent it on its way. She said, I'm sending it back to where it came from. And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't tell her. I didn't say anything, but I'm like, go back. Go back to that creepy building I saw on the side of the road where you belong.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's where it came from or not, but it was just an interesting series of coincidences there.
How odd. So you heard something on your right side while you were in this old bed, and then they anti-corroborated the haunting story that you told them, like, no, that's not how it goes. And then you found out that it was something you picked up on the way.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, there's something cat-like on your right side right now, just over your right shoulder. Don't look.
Oh, no. Oh, no, it speaks.
That's amazing. So, Becky, you know everybody's wondering, what's in the room?
I haven't gone back in it.
Okay.
I'm afraid to. I just can't bring myself to do it. It's always like the floor is going to cave in if I do, and it's just full of bad energy, and I'm really worried that I'll be forever changed if I go in there. But I saw the building. I saw the building where it exists.
Did you stop at the buildings? Go see them up close, or just drove by?
It's like right up against the road, so I had a pretty good view.
Pretty good view.
Not like you're going fast on those mountain roads.
So this haunted hotel, are you going to share what hotel it is so that we can all go have a spooky day there?
Yes, it's the Hill Springs Inn in Rogersville, Tennessee. Definitely check it out. I wrote on my booking.com review that they're haunted, so I hope they don't mind me sharing that. But I asked every staff member I could about the ghosts, and then they asked me what my experiences were as well.
Nice. So you're going to tell us about some of the ghosts that haunt the Hill Springs Inn?
I will in a Patreon.
All right. Patrons, you heard it here. Head over to patreon.com/homespunhaints in order to get all of the hauntings, not just the strange cantaloupe critter that followed Becky home, but all the traditional hauntings of the Hill Springs Inn in Rogersville, Tennessee, which is near Becky's hometown. And if you are there already, why not sign up to become a member of our Patreon? You'll see why in a second.
Today on the show, we are thrilled to bring on Brandon Weston. He is the author of Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms, Magic and Folklore from the Ozark Mountains. We have sort of hinted to this in past episodes that we're going to branch a little bit outside of the Appalachian chain that we've talked about that goes from North Georgia up until I guess Maine, and move a little bit west into the Ozarks. But I was just talking to Brandon here before we got started, and the Ozarks are actually considered part of the greater Appalachian region, correct, Brandon?
It is, culturally speaking, anyway.
And I also just learned that the Ozarks look exactly like the Appalachians.
Yeah, the mountains here are a little bit smaller. Technically, the Ozarks are an eroded plateau, so we've been worn down, but it has created basically what people call a little Appalachia here.
Aww. Neat. I love that. Well, Brandon, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start by talking about your book, Granny Thornapple. It is a really, really fun book to read because it is set up like a recipe book.
Oh, that's so sweet.
You'll talk about a charm and how to do it, and then the ingredients, how to put it together. It's just like a recipe where it's like, okay, well, this is what you need. You need to go preheat your oven. These are the pieces of equipment you need, and in addition to your ingredients, and then how you do it. You also have anecdotes and stories sprinkled throughout. And you talk about that in the book, how becoming a charmer really is in many ways an oral tradition, which is something that we're all about here. The tradition of storytelling and how there's actually magic in storytelling and passing down these things through an oral tradition. And then also you have stories of people who are able to create charms just with the power of their own voice and with their words. I think there's a line in there where a true charmer can make magic happen in an empty jail cell.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of background, Ozark folk magic, historically, these traditions have been based in families, and families differ from other families. So what one family might develop and pass through their family might look different from what the people in the other holler was doing. And occasionally these people would get together and they might share things, pass things along, like recipes. You know, you have a good recipe for a lemon meringue pie, and I have one for a chocolate cream pie, and we'll trade. But these traditions are very diverse. The second book that I wrote, the Ozark Mountain Spell Book, I really wanted to create a practice guide companion to the first book, Ozark Folk Magic. The second book has all of the rituals. It really is a recipe book. If you are into that sort of style, you would love the spell book as well. But what I've been telling people is the spell book is really what you do in the kitchen when you have all your ingredients around you, all of that stuff. And Granny Thornapple is really about what we do when we don't have all of our stuff with us. The charming tradition historically has been reactionary practices. It has been memorized practices, charms, simple verses, things like that people can easily memorize, passed down orally and through storytelling. The example I give in the book is, what do you do when you see your enemy in the grocery store and you don't have the ingredients for a ritual? You can't light a candle in the grocery store. And really, the charming tradition, what this path has to offer is really this inborn sort of magic, this inborn power that we can connect to in the moment when we need that quick work. The verbal charms that are in the book are really easy to memorize. A lot of them are nursery rhymes. There's a big tradition in the Ozarks of repurposing nursery rhymes for charms and magic and all of that. Historically, people have been memorizing things like Bible verses and the Psalms and stuff like that. The charming tradition is really about intention harnessing that gift or power or whatever you want to call it that's in a person, and how do we transform that into something usable? I liken it in the book to spinning wool into yarn. You have this chaotic mass in the beginning, and then as you are spinning it, you're straightening all these fibers out into something that's usable later on. And that's the heart of the charming tradition, is how do we take this raw, chaotic power of nature, power that's inside of ourselves, and how do we harness it into something that can be usable and that can be quick, reactionary? Granny Thornapple is kind of an amalgam of a lot of different people I've known and characters through Ozark folklore. And one of my teachers, who actually in part inspired the character of Granny Thornapple, she was the one that actually gave me that line about the jail cell. And she was a big proponent of the power, call it the gift is what we traditionally call it in the Ozarks, but that is a part of us. It's a living part of us. And if we know how to connect to that, we don't really need much.
So just to clarify then, so charming is just a subset within folk magic.
So the charming tradition actually pops up across all different forms of Ozark folk healing. Basically, the way I break it down is how much ritual is used and how little ritual is used. If you are doing maybe a bigger ritual as a part of a healing work, you would probably have verbal charms that are in that work. But the charming tradition itself tends to rely less upon the external stuff and more upon the internal stuff. And so really it's however you want to sort of engage with the practice. I have met very powerful, healers who worked with ritual, and I have met very powerful healers who didn't work with anything. One of my favorite healers that I worked with, all she did as a part of her practice, and I say all she did, but I mean, this was enough for her. People would bring her their prescription medications or their prescriptions, and she would pray over them. And that's all that she did. And every day she had people waiting on her front porch for her, to bring her these medicines that she could pray over. And people swore that they were more effective. They didn't have to take them as long. But that was her gift. That was what she did. Likewise, I've met healers who did the full ritual spectrum of magical timing, finding the perfect astrological day to do a certain work. So we really can't say that Ozark folk magic is all this one thing, because really it's a bunch of different people who have this gift, who have been passed this gift or been born with it, who are engaging with that gift in whatever way they feel like they're being led to engage with it. I consider myself to be a practitioner of this, and I always tell people that this is a living practice. It's an evolving practice because it is so based in how people engage with their own gifts. Granny Thornapple, her story and the work that's in this book is a real good sort of example of the traditional stuff as well as how the traditions have been reinterpreted today.
I was just thinking how much this reminds me of the parallel to cooking and recipes, and how we all will do our own spin on certain dishes, and how you can say a dish is regional, but it really is going to be different no matter who does it. And it also kind of reminds me of, again, with the oral traditions, it's interesting how you said people will share things with each other, because I know with the baking and cooking tradition that I grew up with, that was not the case. You took that to your grave. And when I was about to go off to college, my mother sat me down and made me make every single recipe that she had learned from her mother in front of her. And I had to do it in front of her before she would give me a written copy of what those were. And I was not allowed to give the recipes to my paternal grandmother. I was not allowed to give them to my mother-in-law. Diana, I'll make you my great aunt Lenora's date nut roll-ups one day.
But you won't teach me how.
No, I won't teach you how. I've been sworn to secrecy. You mentioned that people would share these terms with each other. So what is the difference? Why is it that they're not going to protect that information?
Sometimes they did. Once the healer culture moved out of the home and into the community, once communities started building up, healers were often much more likely to be secretive about what they did because they had a position within the community and they had a reputation to uphold. And there's also, there are different theories about specifically verbal charms. In the old days, the tradition was that verbal charms had to be said secretly. So if you were reciting a charm for a specific purpose, you would do it behind your hand or in a really low tone because nobody was supposed to hear it. And the more people that heard your verbal charms, the less power the charm would have. There's lots of stories about people say you could pass down the charms to 3 different people before it was gone altogether for yourself. That changes depending on who you're talking to. Sometimes it's only once, sometimes it's more than that. But there is this idea amongst the traditionalists or the old school workers that you sort of enter retirement at some point and you pass down everything to a grandchild or somebody in the community that's been identified with the gift, and everything leaves you and goes into that person. A lot of that has changed today simply because there are so few healers and so few people interested. The healers that I met a couple that were very secretive until I got to know them, and then they felt comfortable passing me certain things. But most of the healers that I met, the old school ones, there was no one in their family, no one in their community that wanted any of this information. They weren't interested. And so they were really just happy to be able to pass it down to anybody, even though the old taboos were maybe not in place. I've been passed so many charms, more than I will ever really know what to do with. But the charms that are in both the spell book and Granny Thornapple's book, these are charms that have a life of their own. There's no taboo around publishing these charms or anything like that. But there are a lot of charms that I have that I will never publish and will only pass down to people that I feel like will receive them well.
Can you give us a little bit of backstory on how ghosts and haints are regarded in the Ozarks?
Yeah, so we call them haints here too. We have lots of haint lore here in the Ozarks. I think a lot of it is probably very similar to what you find in Appalachia. One of the things that's been really interesting for me, I really like collecting what we call tokens, or they're like omens. These are death omens, omens that loved ones are visiting. One of the common ones is when you see a butterfly, it's a message from beyond, a loved one that's coming back to visit. A pretty famous one here is if you see a red bird pecking at your window, it means that someone close to you is going to die soon. Tokens and omens in the Ozarks are very, very diverse and very powerful. People still believe in all of these things. I've been in situations before where people have observed certain tokens, screech owl screaming during a ritual healing, which might signify that somebody's trying to interrupt the work. In this case that I'm remembering, somebody was trying to interrupt the work in that case, and the screech owl was signaling that somebody was trying to magically interfere with the healing work that was being done. So the teacher that I was working with, she stopped, and she had to do certain countermeasures to counter the token before we could move on with the rest of the work. And then she did extra stuff to help protect what was going on. And with a screech owl, specifically, for those who want to know the countermeasure for a screech owl token, in your left hand, you take a pinch of salt and you throw it into a fire. We might not have fire in our homes these days. I've done it with a gas oven stovetop before, and it seems to work pretty well. Just throwing it into that fire. I've also thrown it into jar candles to light a candle, throw some salt into it. But there are a lot of these, and they all have connections with the spirit world. In the Ozarks, as I'm sure in Appalachia, our spirit world doesn't just include spirits of the dead, but also includes a whole lot of other stuff that goes by the name of spirit too. So this includes the little people, which are like the fairies, also land spirits, spirits that occupy certain land features. It can also include demons and devils and things like that. Spirit practices in the Ozarks, it encompasses a wide variety of different entities. And there traditionally have been experts who their gift is the sight or the second sight. which allows them to not only just pick up on tokens and omens in general, but also sometimes be able to actually sense spirits, sometimes see spirits of the dead. I've met individuals with a sight who didn't see spirits of the dead, but they could see fairies. They could see the little people. Traditionally, there have been experts within the community who are there specifically to deal with problematic things from the other world. A lot of that is the folk exorcisms, driving out spirits, things like that. One of my teachers was a pretty well-known spirit worker in her community, which a lot of this stuff would be kept secret just because the community gets very iffy when it comes to the spirit world. And so people aren't actively ready to share their beliefs about this stuff always. But this teacher in particular, she was accepted by the community because the work that she did was she would not exorcise spirits, she would elevate spirits. So she would help them heal and move on. That was the work that she did. And so her community really upheld her as this is good work that she's doing. No, she's not summoning demons and stuff like that. She's helping the demons. She's helping them move on. She always called it a kinder exorcism. I really like that. And I kind of keep that within my own work. This is an eerie landscape. When the fog rolls through the hills, it really gets to be kind of a spooky place. And place is a very important theme here in the Ozarks. There's this idea that no matter where you are, there is a spirit there. There are spirits of the dead, but then also spirits of certain mountains. Certain mountains have an animus, have a life force to them, as well as all of the individual little things living on the mountain too. And these all interact with each other, and they interact with us as well. Part of the work that I do, I haven't had to do this in a while, but I'm always waiting for the next phone call, but people would have me come fix problems, spirit problems on their properties or in their homes. And there was a few times where the problem was that something was done to a land feature. So in one case, the guy that was having a lot of issues, the issues being all of his livestock was dying constantly and he didn't know why, but he had dug up and filled in an old spring, a natural spring, which in Ozark worldview is a no-no. You never mess with stuff like that. These are things that can cause imbalances with the spirit world and then can cause problems later on.
That's interesting. That sounds actually very Scandinavian.
I was just reminded of elves there.
Yes, and trolls, you have to ask permission to move a rock or to cut down a tree or something like that.
Ozark culture is a sort of mishmash of a lot of stuff. I always joke, it's like throw a dart at a map of Europe and an Ozarker is from there. For me, as both a researcher and a practitioner, it's really interesting to look at those common traditions. A good one that I always give people is the use of red cedar. Red cedar is actually a juniper, Juniperus virginiana. The Highland people in Germany and Scotland were using red cedar as a cleansing smoke. They were using it to sweep out their houses and exorcise spirits. And when they got to the New World, they found the red cedar, which was a juniper. Well, the indigenous people in the Southeast had been using red cedar in the same exact ways before contact. And so
what?
It's one of these things where you're like, okay, well, who influenced who, or did anybody influence anybody, you know? And there are a lot of those different traditions here where it's really hard to pull apart who influenced who.
You've done work where you've helped people who've disrupted the landscape and helped them get things back on track. But have you personally ever seen or encountered something that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, no, I have a lot of those, actually. A big part of the work that I do is help people rebalance their lives with the spirit world because we get out of balance a lot. I was working with this family. They were in a very rural part of the Ozarks. They had contacted me originally because they were having a lot of problems within their house. They said, well, our house is haunted. We need some help. For me, I'm like, haunted how? Like, like, why do you think it's haunted? And so I just started my investigation at that point, and I had to make trips out to see them. But it got to the point where I was doing so much work out there, they had me stay a few weekends so that I could really get a sense of what was going on. My encounters with the spirit that was there ended up being very different from theirs. They were hearing noises at night, classic raps and knocks and things like that, which for an old house, the house that I currently live in is probably haunted, but also just like creaks and moans and pops and snaps and all this other stuff. But one of the weird things that they were having issues with is they would get woken up in the middle of the night by their dogs outside going crazy about something.
Uh-oh.
And of course, like coyotes are abounding and all this, but they were used to most other animals. And so they were getting really worried that there was a bear or a mountain lion or something like that. And every time they would go out, there would be nothing there. Before I started coming out to the house, the guy that lived there, he said he stayed up on the porch to see if he could see what was going on. And he woke up and the dogs were freaking out, barking, and nothing was there. When I went and stayed with them, that was one thing that I really wanted to look into. I actually camped out in a little tent on their land near where the dogs were just to be around. The first night I did that, the dogs started freaking out and I woke up. And I looked out and what I saw was, it looked like a wolf or like a big dog of some sort, but it was solid black. And it just moved briefly through the shadows. There was this sort of field area. None of the grass was being bent over as it went.
Whoa.
And so the next morning over breakfast, I shared that with the guy and he got freaked out immediately. In Ozark folklore, we have boogers. Do you all have boogers?
Yep, we sure do.
I felt like this was a booger dog. It met all of the criteria of a booger, which is solid black, unusual looking animal, very ghostly, doesn't leave footprints. I ended up staying another night to see if it happened again, and it didn't. And then I came back a few weeks later and repeated the ritual. The dogs went crazy, and I woke up and looked out. I never saw anything again, but every time I was out there, I knew something was going on and had seen it that one time. There was one night where I had to leave early, so I was driving back on this dirt road away from the house. I was thinking about how I was going to deal with this situation and all of this. And as I was driving down this dirt road, this big black wolf dog looking thing, bigger than any dog I've ever seen, jumped a fence and landed in the dirt road, looked at me, but as I got close to it, my lights did not illuminate it, which creeped me out. So I started slowing down and just saw its glowing eyes, and then it, in one leap, leapt back over the cattle fence on the other side and went through the field. I heard the voice of one of my teachers in the back of my mind that said to me, she was like, "That thing's trying to follow you, go back." I ended up going back to this guy's house rather than continuing on to my house. When I got to his house, then we did some ritual work to get it to leave, and I ended up staying a few days doing some work there. It ended up being successful, and I didn't bring a booger dog home with me.
That's
which is
very good.
Yeah, very, very good. We were able to send it on its way. From my personal experience, boogers, while kind of scary, are not always difficult to get rid of.
What do you think it wanted? Why was it there in the first place?
Well, so I never got a clear answer. And whenever I'm doing sessions like this or doing a house blessing or whatever, I do divination sessions while I'm there to see where the track of the work is going. And I was never able to really determine what it was. It never checked the boxes for like an earthbound spirit that couldn't leave or anything like that. It just felt like it just was there for some reason. It just wanted to be there. And what I did learn through the divination and ritual process was that when I was leaving, it didn't want to be there anymore. It wanted to go somewhere else. So it was a really good thing that I didn't continue back home before sending it on its way.
It may have been lost or something.
Yeah.
Like it had a purpose, but it couldn't complete its purpose where it was stuck.
Yeah, the guy also suspected his mother-in-law was kind of, as we say, a real piece of work. She had passed years before, but he suspected that maybe she was sending something to him, or she was the booger dog or something. He had that feeling. And normally these are people's houses. These people are here every day. I'm here maybe a few hours. So normally I trust when people have certain feelings about certain situations. So as a part of the ritual work that we did, we actually targeted the mother-in-law just a little bit as a part of that work as well.
Just to help us understand how this booger dog functioned, would you liken it to a hellhound appearance, or more of like a ghost or a cryptid, or maybe like the Hat Man where it's just a shadow that you can't really focus on? Is there any comparable thing from other traditions we could kind of visualize to see this in our mind?
In Ozark folklore, boogers occupy a very strange position because according to some of the lore, they are more of a cryptid. They are their own creature entity. But then a lot of the lore is that a booger is always a spirit or a witch or something in disguise. Like somebody is taking the form of a booger, or a ghost appears as a booger. It's a weird creature in Ozark folklore. Boogers can also be all kinds of animals. I've heard stories of booger possums before. It's just which I think is adorable, but
that sounds mostly harmless.
Yeah, booger rabbits are also pretty famous. They are defined by their all black appearance, and even their eyes will be black, and they have this ghost-like quality to them. But then, so in my experience, and I've experienced a few different boogers before, it's really hard to tell their intention, why they're there, what they are. It leads me to believe that they are closer to a land spirit, because with other land spirits, a lot of times they don't have an intention. Their intention is just to be the land, is just to be there. They sometimes feel close to that, but boogers travel, and land spirits normally don't. And so that's what makes them a little bit unusual, is that they can occupy different areas, different spaces. But I have, on a couple occasions, have suspected, this was one of them, that it might have been somebody taking the form, or a spirit taking the form of this booger.
So you said you've encountered this several times. Tell us another one of these stories, because that sent shivers down my spine. That was great.
Boogers are simultaneously my favorite Ozark monster, but also I don't want to even say that out loud for fear that one will show up. I encountered one time, I was going up with a teacher of mine. She did house calls with her healing work, and she was one that really looked out for omens and tokens during the healing process, which is very traditional, but it's hard. It's very rare to find that anymore. But she was hyper paranoid, so she would look out for all sorts of different signs and things, either that the process was successful or not successful. In this situation, we had been to this person's house. She had done some healing work with them, made them supper, things like that. I was heading back. I drove separately. I was going to go a different way, and it was at night. I've never seen or encountered a booger during the day. I have known people that claim they have, but I personally have not. I was going along, and this is in and of itself is a bad omen, but coupled with the fact that this involves a booger made it even spookier. I was going along a dirt road. I think it's, that's how these things always happen. And at first I thought it was a buzzard in the road, like a vulture on something, but it was night. It was like the middle of the night, first of all, which was weird. All I saw was this feathered back with the wings sort of forward away from my car. I immediately was like, okay, well, I don't want to hit this buzzard. So I start to slow down and I honk my horn a little bit. It sort of folds up its wings, and I noticed that there's nothing dead, like there's no carrion on the road. And it was a black owl. It was this big black owl, which I don't think we have black owls. I don't know that they exist. A friend of mine who's a master naturalist, he said that owls can be, like animals can be albino or whatever the opposite of albino is. Like you can have all black squirrels, you can have albino squirrels. And he claimed that owls could be the same. I still don't believe him. But it was also unusually big. I thought it was a buzzard, like a vulture at first. It just looked at me, and then it flew directly at my car and over my car.
Geek.
Okay.
And so
No.
Again, something just told me, okay, there's something up. So I started to go back to my teacher's house because I had to go past her patient's house in this tiny community to eventually get on the road to go to her house. I noticed that she was back at the guy's house, the patient's house. And so I pulled in, and she had a little bit of a premonition, and he had taken a really bad turn and had like a really bad fever and was like in bad shape. And so I told her about the owl, and she just sort of nodded, and she was like, well, I'm glad you came back, and we'll talk about that later. That situation, it was a booger, or what I would call a booger, but it was also delivering a sort of token or an omen. I've always had this interesting sort of relationship with boogers where it's like, I don't know whether or not you're trying to be helpful or trying to do something bad to me, or like what you're doing. They are very confusing entities sometimes.
And people always associate the owl with the harbinger of death and the psychopomp function. So that's very telling that he would have flown back the way that you came from. And when you followed that direction, you had stumbled upon somebody who was very ill and perhaps close to death.
Which in Ozark folk belief, to see an owl in the road is bad luck anyway. It's like a black cat crossing your path, that sort of thing. But that's just a normal owl is the bad luck. Right. The booger adds a certain amount of intensity, I guess, to it.
No kidding.
Right.
So you said the boogers are totally different from the physical concept of what we would normally call cryptids, like Sasquatch and such. Becky always talks about Appalachian cryptids. Do you know much about the cryptids in the Ozarks and if they're similar or different from the ones in the Appalachians?
Oh, we definitely have some similar ones. We have some regionally specific ones as well, like the Gowrow.
What?
It's like kind of a dragon dinosaur thing that lives in caves and eats whole cows.
I love it.
Yeah, the Gowrow is pretty famous in the Ozarks. In my experience, boogers have much more of a spiritual sort of side to them. But I think that's also my perception of it, too, because I tend to have more of a connection to the other world and the spirit world. But I've known people that classify them as cryptids. You can go hunt down boogers. There's a way of killing boogers, things like that. They kind of have a weird position. Whereas creatures like the Gowrow, it doesn't have, to my knowledge, any sort of spiritualized side to it. It is all physical. And we have others. There's like the side hill hoofer. Have you heard of this?
No.
So the side hill hoofer is like a combination armadillo sheep thing. On one side of its body, its legs are shorter than on the other because it goes around the outside of the hill. In order to run straight, it has to have uneven legs. So one way of capturing the side hill hoofer is to tip it over, because then it can't get back up. Because it has these tiny legs on one side.
I really feel like I remember my grandfather talking about this once.
Why would you want to capture one? Are they delicious? Armadillos are generally not edible.
No, you get leprosy.
There's a history in the Ozarks of people going on these expeditions to find, like the Gowrow, for instance. These things were published in like newspapers. People were going to find the Gowrow and stuff. And a lot of it was the fame of it. Like you want to be able to bring one back alive to like show off, which I don't think anybody has. But there was a story about a spelunker who found a Gowrow cave that was filled with cattle bones, and it was very spooky.
You've had encounters with boogers, but you've also had encounters with just regular old run-of-the-mill haints, correct?
Sure. So along the same lines, I've visited quite a few houses that were just classically haunted. A lot of the work that I do is word of mouth. So there was a couple years where about every month somebody was calling me about a haunted barn that they had.
So typical.
Yeah, I know, right? And so I had visited one and helped a guy with a haint problem in his barn. I think what happened was he spread the word, and then people started calling me about their haunted barns. Spooky encounters. I always like to spend the night in haunted places because I'm kind of crazy like that. But also, my teacher who taught me this kinder exorcism that she worked in, she was a big proponent of staying in the place of the haunting because you're a guest staying in this spirit space. rather than just barging in and asking a bunch of questions. You stay in the place and you get to know, and you ask questions along the way. I have different divination techniques and things that I use with questioning. And so one in particular, the spookiest barn, it's sort of a classic haunting in the beginning where there was lots of weird noises and things going on. He tried to keep animals in the barn, but they kept getting out for some reason. No matter how much he secured the doors, they would get out somehow. To the point where he was like, before he called me, he had chained and padlocked the door. And in the morning, all of his animals were out. They were gone. The padlock and the chain was off the door. It was very spooky sort of things like that. And so I just stayed in the barn. I had the little tent that I put up and just stayed in the space. He didn't have any animals come in the space, but I figured me being in the space might be enough to get me to go or whatever. So I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud creaking thumping noise, which was unusual. When I looked out into the barn, I didn't see anything, but the door that I had secured to the barn was open. I hadn't chained it or padlocked it or anything. I just closed it, but it had a bolt on it. Something had to have pushed open the bolt and then pushed open the doors. The plan that I made for this spirit was to see if I could get it to just move on, because it wasn't hurting anything. It was just being a little mischievous for whatever reason. Through one of the divination sessions that I did, it came to light that the spirit in some way was trying to help. That was just like what came through. It was trying to help. I still don't know the backstory of this spirit, but for me, it always felt like it was letting out the animals in the morning to go graze or to grow, that sort of thing. I never got the impression that it was doing anything malevolent or anything malicious.
Would you say you successfully elevated it and allowed it to move on?
Yeah. The process that I did was basically I worked at giving it a new job. Which is how I have helped a lot of spirits, is just redirecting them. Sometimes that's hard if they don't know they're dead or they don't know what's going on. But this one seemed to know what was going on, but just wanted to be helpful still. The path that we redirected it towards was, and the guy that owned the property didn't even want it gone necessarily. It was just a weird annoyance more than anything. The path that we gave it was, well, if you want to be helpful, why don't you watch over these animals? Why don't you protect them if like a coyote's going to come and get them or things like that? But let the owner of these animals do all the chores, but you can watch over them. And after that, there was no activity in the barn whatsoever. The guy, I talked to him a couple years ago, he didn't have any coyotes, foxes, nothing coming around his house or his farm anymore. I think a lot of times spirits don't necessarily need to be exorcised. They maybe just need a different goal. You know, they need a different activity, an activity that's fulfilling too. There was one case where it was a malicious haint that was scratching people in their sleeps and things like that. The sessions that we did, we determined that the ghost was protecting their kids. Like nothing was happening to the kids in the house. Everything was happening to any adult that stayed in the house. Through the divinations that I did, we got this sense that it was really trying to protect the kids, that it had had a bad experience with adults and things like that. And so we redirected that into more useful protector haint. So rather than hurting everybody that comes into the house, we helped it become a little bit of a house protector. We basically taught it, these are the things to keep out, these are the things you can let in, that sort of thing. And so we gave it a higher order goal rather than just hurt everybody.
I can't wait to listen back to everything that we just recorded today. There's so much cool information in here. Diana, do you have any further questions?
Well, the one thing I wanted to do at the end of this interview was get an example of how you would use a nursery rhyme as a magical incantation.
Oh, yes. That was a fun part of working on Granny Thornapple, because I was able to bring out all of these charms that I had collected. Nursery rhymes, I'm not an academic, so I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that a lot of these originated as verbal charms to begin with. And then they entered into popular culture and then childhood culture and things like that. But my favorites are the Mother Goose rhymes. I had heard and collected these from individuals around the Ozarks, and then I found this old manuscript of an older Mother Goose collection that didn't take out all of the more violent rhymes. Like all of the modern collections don't normally have any of these. My favorite ones are included in Granny Thornapple in the Retribution section. And retribution magic or work in the Ozarks, a lot of the old timers don't use the word magic. They'll just say retribution work, things like that. It's basically a return to sender healing ritual where it's like your enemy has sent something to make you sick, or somebody has slandered against you, and you're going to take that and return it back to them as a part of the healing process. There are a lot of really good Mother Goose rhymes to use. So one of my favorite ones is against a slanderer. Tell-tale tit, your tongue shall be split, and all the dogs in town shall have a bit.
Wow. I like that.
One of the rituals that I like to use with that one is you get a cow tongue, like a beef tongue, to represent the slanderer's tongue. And then you split it open, and if you have identifying materials or photographs of the person, you put it in and you do some rituals with it in order basically to bind up their tongue against you so they won't speak against you. There's another one against liars, getting a liar to stop telling lies about you or about your client or whoever. And this one is a ritual where you burn them up. The Mother Goose rhyme with this is liar, liar, lick spit, turn around the candlestick. What's good for liars? Brimstone and fires.
Oh.
And so the ritual with that is you can just burn it up on a candle, but what my favorite way to do it is you light a bed of coals like in your grill outside, and you take their photograph or their name on a piece of paper, and then you slowly char it over the fire until it goes away. Retribution work, it gets called cursing or curse work a lot of the times, and people have a very uncomfortable position with it. But really, from an Ozark perspective, retribution work is always a healing act. This is always a reactionary magic or work.
Always acting in self-defense.
It's acting in self-defense.
These are really good examples, and I can't wait to read the whole book.
Brandon, this has been such a delightful interview to chat with you. Again, you have so much knowledge. So thrilled to actually have a chance to sit down and talk with you because there's so much more I know that you could share with us. You have 3 books out. The latest one is Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms, which those latest retributions that you came from are in there. And then you've also written Ozark Folk Magic and Ozark Mountain Spellbook. And people can find out more about you at ozarkhealing.com. And if people are in your neck of the woods and they have an issue, could they contact you at ozarkhealing.com? Can they get in touch and have you come out and take care of their boogers or their haints or whatever else might be?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have a contact form on the website, and that's the best way to get in touch with me. I'm always open to questions or concerns or anything like that. The work that I do is I really call myself a consultant more than anything, because that's what I do. People come to me with their random problems that all humans have, and we sit down and we talk about the problem, and we come up with a way for them to engage with the process of solving that problem. Whether that is a haunted barn or all of the other things that we sometimes have to deal with, I like to really address each individual as the individual needs to be addressed.
Brandon, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I thoroughly enjoyed your book. This is definitely going to be something I'm going to be referring back to because just so much of it resonated.
Hainted Loves, we're so glad you got to join us today so that you could learn how to train your haints. And if you too have a haunted barn, let us know. We'd love to come have a spooky day with you.
Homespun Haints is hosted by Becky Kielimnik and Diana Doty, and produced by Homespun Haints Media LLC. Editing and music by Becky Kielimnik. Show notes by Diana Doty. If you have a ghost story and you'd like to be considered as a guest for this podcast, please visit our website at homespunhaints.com/submit.